Shalom, welcome to the Jewish Task Force, J.T.F. This is Chaim ben Pesach, and I have with me again the great David ben Moshe. This is going to be a program where we're going to explain to you exactly why Kamala Harris's election to the presidency would be such a grave danger to Israel, exactly technically what she would do as president that could create a Palestinian state, that could create a situation where Israel will be indefensible. How she will do that technically, because most Israelis are against a Palestinian state, but it could come into being anyway. And we're going to explain to you what her strategy is for creating the state. It's not her strategy. She's a moron. But the strategy of the people behind her, what their strategy is going to be to create a state, and technically exactly how they're going to do it so that you'll know why she is such a grave danger to the very survival of the Jewish people. And if we have time, we're also going to speak about the hostages in Israel and the attempt to get this hostage ceasefire deal, how phony all of this is. We're going to get to the bottom of that if we have time. But first, this program is dedicated to Refuah Shlema, complete recovery for Sharon Mitman, Shlomo ben Sarah, Dorit bat Sarah, Ruven ben Shoshana, and Ruth bat Sarah. And to Ilui Neshamot, elevating of the souls for Malka bat Meir, Allegra bat Shlomo, Daniel Nankin, Victor Chazdai, Pesach Zeb ben Dov, Lunita Adler, Shifra Hoffman, Ruven Hoffman, Barry Hoffman, Harab Mir Kahana, Rab Benjamin Kahana, Tzipora Fegi bat Liba, Yosef ben Meir, Robert Mittman, Dennis Shore, Helen Friedman, Charles Olat, and Yair Levine. Okay. Here's why Kamala Harris is such a grave danger to Israel. Now, Donald Trump also, in his so-called Middle East peace plan, creates a Palestinian terrorist state, so he's also bad. But Kamala Harris is much worse because she is imposing sanctions on the Jews in Judea and Samaria. And let me just explain to people how that works. If the United States imposes sanctions on Hilltop youth, for instance, in Judea and Samaria, because they committed the crime of living in their own homeland. The United States doesn't impose sanctions on the worst terrorist mass murderers in the world. But on the heroic Hilltop youth, they're imposing sanctions. Let me explain to you what happens. Once those sanctions are imposed, the person who has the sanctions imposed upon him cannot use his credit cards anymore, cannot use his bank account anymore. He cannot do any transactions because all the Israeli corporations and companies are also controlled by America. And they're cowards, and it's a disgrace. They shouldn't be. They should not be agreeing to this. But the Israeli banks and Israeli companies and Israeli credit card companies all agree when the United States imposes sanctions, they agree to block this person from doing anything. And so he no longer is able to do anything, to even buy food, to function. He can't do anything. He doesn't have a bank account, doesn't have credit cards, doesn't have any business transactions, has nothing, has no ability to survive. And these people, most of these people have families with children. And they can't feed their own children and even buy food and basics for their own family. So to get around it, people wanted to create funds to help the people who are sanctioned and raise funds for them so that we're going to help them. We're going to give them the money. But there's a problem. J.T.F. is a major source of funding for them. If they are sanctioned, it is a federal crime for me to send money to anyone who's under sanctions. It's a federal crime. It's a felony. They could put me in prison, and they would put me in prison. So we will be unable to help them. And in Israel, even the fundraising, like GoFundMe in the United States, they have similar things in Israel. But those companies are afraid of American sanctioning. And so those companies do not allow people to raise money for them. So we're completely stuck if everybody is sanctioned. If she imposes sanctions on everybody, we're stuck. And if that means that will lead to the destruction of these Hilltop youth communities, if then the army can go in and destroy their communities and they can't rebuild because they don't have the funds and they don't have the ability, they have no way of even communicating with people because they're under sanctions, It's an Orwellian twilight zone that she's creating. These sanctions are intended only for the worst terrorist murderers. That's the purpose of sanctions, to go after terrorist murderers like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hamas. It should be Hamas and Hezbollah, but they don't sanction Hamas and Hezbollah and these other organizations. And the PLO and Fatah are not only are they not sanctioned, the PLO and Fatah get hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. foreign aid every year, which Donald Trump cut off. He cut that foreign aid to the PLO and to Fatah. But Kamala Harris and her administration immediately restored it and want to increase it. So the Arab terrorists get foreign aid, get hundreds of millions of dollars from American taxpayers. And Jews who want to just save their homeland from national destruction, from national suicide, to prevent the creation of a Palestinian terrorist state where Israel will be only 6 to 9 miles wide, Jews who want to do that are put under criminal sanctions as if they're terrorists. They're on lists. They're being listed as if they're terrorists. They're being listed together with Al-Qaeda and ISIS terrorists. That's not anti-Semitism doing this to Jews. What did these Jews do? What did they do wrong?
How do they know who to sanction? What did Israel send us a list of names?
No, they know who lives in Judea and Samaria and who's involved. They know. Israel would send them a list too. If they tell Israel, send us lists, Israel will send them a list. Now, these sanctions are extremely unpopular in Israel. Even the left in Israel have some people on the left have condemned the sanctions. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who you know is a pathetic wimp, he has condemned the sanctions. So you know they're very unpopular among the Israeli people, because the nerve of a foreign country, the United States, coming in and sanctioning Israeli citizens like this and cutting off their credit cards and bank accounts in what's supposed to be a sovereign country. Israel's supposed to be an independent sovereign country. And the United States, a foreign country, comes in and dictates that this guy can't have a credit card. This guy can't have bank accounts. This guy has to be, he and his family have to starve to death, God forbid. I mean, this is very unpopular in Israel, what they're doing. But this is their policy. Now, I hope Donald Trump doesn't continue this policy. I don't trust Donald Trump. He should not be trusted, and he can't be trusted. He's proven that. But when he was president, he didn't do this. He did not impose sanctions. And it's because of his imposition of sanctions that for us, for the Kahanist movement, it's all-out war now against Kamala Harris. This is it. Okay? We'll do everything we can to defeat her now because of the sanctions. And Trump didn't do it. Trump did not do this when he was in office. And so we're going to do everything we can to get him elected, because we don't want these sanctions not only endanger these Jewish heroes and are a terrible injustice against these Jewish heroes, they endanger the very survival of Israel. Because if this leads to the collapse of the Hilltop youth communities, God forbid, if they're not able to get any funding or any support, and then the Israeli army comes in and destroys their communities, and then they can't rebuild, which is what they do now. Now they just rebuild and rebuild even bigger and better every time. Every time the Israeli army comes in and destroys, they rebuild and rebuild bigger and better, and are expanding and expanding and expanding, which is why the Arabs are in a panic over that. And by the way, they've grown from a few hundred when we started a little over 3 years ago, when J.T.F. started about 3 years ago. Now it's a few thousand. I mean, they've grown exponentially. And, the traitors in Israel that want a Palestinian state, and the American officials like Kamala Harris and Blinken and these other filthy Jew haters, or the late Joe Biden, Yamach Shmo, another filthy Jew hater, they can see the writing on the wall. They know that if this continues like this, you're not going to have a Palestinian state if they continue to expand their settlements and block Arab territorial continuity. But if they're unable to do this, and this leads to the collapse of their communities because they just can't, they don't have the funds or the resources or the ability to continue. If that happens, God forbid, and then the Arabs take over all of Judea and Samaria, because that's what will happen. The Arabs will immediately take over all the strategic hilltops, and that will lead to a takeover of Judea and Samaria. If that happens, Israel is 6 to 9 miles wide. You think Israel can survive, outnumbered 100 to 1 by the Muslim world, when they're in borders that are only 6 to 9 miles wide? In the Yom Kippur War in 1973, if Israel had been 6 to 9 miles wide, Israel would have been destroyed, God forbid. It was only because they had the buffer of Sinai and other buffers and the Golan Heights, they had that buffer that enabled them to come back and to survive in the Yom Kippur War when the Arabs made a sneak attack on them on Yom Kippur in 1973. There have been many instances where it's clear that in those borders, Israel cannot survive. And so we're talking about something that very easily can lead to another Holocaust for the Jewish people. And that is no exaggeration. We're speaking about another Holocaust, God forbid. And that's why it is so essential that Kamala Harris be defeated. And by the way, think about this. They're sanctioning people that they say are the ones that are standing in the way of a Palestinian state. Almost everybody on the sanction list are Hilltop youth that are supported by J.T.F. Almost everyone on that list are Hilltop youth. So if you want to prevent the so-called Palestinian state, and there are no Palestinians, there is no Palestine, that's all a lie. But if you want to create a so-called Palestinian state, the only way to do it is supporting the Hilltop youth. Can you believe that everything we've said here is all true, and you can check all of everything we've said? Can you believe, though, that with that situation, with them, the Hilltop youth being the only ones who are standing in the way here and protecting the Jewish people from this, from another Holocaust, in a situation like that, can you believe J.T.F. is the only organization outside of Israel that supports them? Can you believe this? You heard the message. Jews and righteous Gentiles, now is your chance to help. And we are duty-bound to help. We have an obligation to help them. They're putting their lives on the line. They and their families, they're putting their lives on the line to save the Jewish people from a Holocaust. Anyone with an ounce of morality, with an ounce of decency, has to support them. This is the cause to support. Here's how you support the heroic Hilltop youth. Online, you go to our, if you want to do it online, you go to our Hebrew main page, hayamin.org, and you click on the donate button in English. The page is in Hebrew, but the donate button is English. By the way, let me just clarify something quickly, because you may say, well, if they're sanctioned, then why is J.T.F. still giving the money? Because most of them have not yet been sanctioned. The vast majority, the overwhelming majority, have not been sanctioned yet. But the White House and the State Department made it clear that they plan to increase this and step this up. And so after the election, they could put sanctions on everybody there. That'll be a nightmare that will really endanger the survival of millions of Jews. So right now, we're still able to help them. But that could change if Kamala Harris wins the election. That's what's at stake here. Anyway, if you want to help them, though, if you want to build up their communities and help them, this is the time to do it. You click on the donate button on hayamin.org on our main page, and you can, in several minutes, very easily and conveniently donate. Again, you go to hayamin.org, our Hebrew main page, and there's a donate button in English on top. That's if you want to do it online. If you want to do it through the internet, you can send checks or money orders made out to J.T.F., and you send it to J.T.F. P.O. Box 650327, Fresh Meadows, New York, 11365. Now, I don't know how many of you are following what's going on in Israel with the ceasefire. They want to have they want to agree to a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages that are supposedly still alive. I think most of them have been murdered already. But the hostages that the Hamas terrorists still have, the left has a new tactic, new technique, and the American government that wants Israel to commit suicide here, that wants Israel to surrender, commit suicide, they have a new tactic. You have to agree to release thousands of Hamas terrorists and to allow Hamas to win the war in exchange for the hostages. That's the agreement that's being proposed here, in exchange for whatever hostages are still alive and for the dead bodies of those who've been murdered. That's the agreement that's being proposed here. And they are being blitzed, the evil, self-hating, anti-Semitic Israeli news media, who are left-wing traitors, just like the American news media are left-wing traitors. The Israeli media are also left-wing traitors. The Israeli media is pushing for this day and night. And many Israelis are being brainwashed by this and thinking, well, we want to save the hostages. Maybe we could still, maybe after we get the hostages back, we'll continue the war. All types of things that they're trying to come up with, which of course are lies. Once Israel agrees to this, there's no going back. It's over. Israel is surrendering. And if Israel surrenders to Hamas and surrenders to Hezbollah, who has already thrown 100,000 Jews out of their homes in the north, if Israel does that, that could be the beginning of the end. That could be a catastrophe for Israel. And so the question is, what is this all of a sudden, this great concern about the hostages? We've got to release the hostages. We've got to, and they keep showing pictures and how terrible, and play on the sympathies of Israelis for the hostages. And 700 Israeli soldiers have already been murdered in this war. That they don't care about. But the hostages. Okay. They are so full of baloney. I'm using a nice word. They're so full of baloney when they claim to care about the hostages. First of all, the anti-Semites of the White House and the State Department certainly don't care about hostages. They want Israel destroyed. They want the Jews dead. They want the Jews to be murdered. And that's no exaggeration. That's what during the Holocaust, they did everything they could to enable Hitler to murder 6 million Jews. And these same Jew haters now, the same mentality, they want Israel to be overrun by the Arabs, and they know that'll lead to a Holocaust. And that's exactly what they'd love to see, including the Jewish anti-Semites among them, like Doug Emhoff, the so-called husband of that hooker, Kamala Harris. She's a hooker. Okay? Kamala Harris slept her way to the top with Willie Brown, with everybody, and marrying her husband, Doug Emhoff, because he's a multimillionaire Hollywood lawyer. A Hollywood lawyer. How can you get anything more immoral and evil than that? And that's what she married, because he had money. That's why she married him. She certainly didn't marry him for his good looks. Anyway, they certainly are not interested. The Americans and Europeans that talk all the time about the hostages, they're certainly not interested in the hostages or in any Jewish lives. They want the Jews dead. They want the Jews murdered. They've always wanted the Jewish people to be exterminated. And Kamala Harris's daughter-in-law, who's raising money for Hamas front groups, her and her family certainly want the Jews dead. But in Israel, these Israeli leftists, all of a sudden, you would think that they have such love for the hostages. They're so concerned about hostages. When 3 million Soviet Jews were being held hostage, 3 million Jewish men, women, and children were being held hostage behind the Soviet Iron Curtain. Where were all of these leftists when you had 3 million hostages? They never had one demonstration for them. From 1917 to 1969, not one demonstration for 52 years of the persecution of Soviet Jews, when Stalin and Lenin murdered thousands of Jews, sending thousands of Jews to Siberian concentration camps. All these leftists never raised their voice then. They were never concerned about that. You never heard anything from them. In 1969, the campaign to free the Soviet Jews started because of the Jewish Defense League of our beloved Rabbi Meir David Kahana, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, Hashem Yikom Damo. It was because of Rabbi Kahana and the JDL that the issue of Soviet Jewry became an issue. To them, this wasn't even an issue. They didn't even care. Nobody even ever spoke about it. The issue was a dead issue. It was not even in the news. It was most people didn't care and didn't want to care and didn't even know anything about it. And when the JDL began a campaign to free 3 million hostages, not 100 hostages, 3 million hostages, when the JDL began that campaign, all of these people in these Jewish establishment organizations and the Israeli politicians and the establishment leaders and the leftists and the news media, the left-wing news media, both the Gentile left-wing news media in America and the Jewish left-wing news media in Israel, what did they do? Did they say to the JDL, oh, that's the way to do it. Yes, we must free the hostages. Yes, continue your campaign. Yeah. They condemned everything JDL did, tried to undermine everything JDL did. They ratted on JDL. They demanded, Jewish leaders and Jewish organizations in America demanded that the FBI and the police arrest all the JDL leaders. In other words, they were rats. They were snitches who went against their fellow Jews. And we pray 3 times a day for the destruction of informers. Informing on your fellow Jews, on Jews who are fighting to save the Jewish people, to inform on them, this is the lowest form of treason possible. We pray for the destruction of informers 3 times a day. It's part of our daily prayer. And these people were so concerned about hostages. When there were 3 million Soviet Jewish hostages, they were nowhere to be found until JDL started its campaign, and then they condemned and did everything they could to undermine JDL's campaign to save the 3 million Jewish hostages in the Soviet Union. So they don't care about hostages. This is an excuse to get Israel to surrender. They want Israel to surrender because they don't want a Jewish state. They want Israel to surrender. They don't want Israel to win the war. That's what all of this is about. Negotiations for a ceasefire and hostages, and that's what all this is about. By the way, these same people, when 6 million Jews were being burned and gassed in the Nazi concentration camps during the Holocaust, they also did not one thing to save them. And when Ben Hecht and right-wing Jews tried to save the Jews during the Holocaust, these same self-hating traitors from the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Congress and the American Jewish Committee and the United Jewish Appeal and Federation, the UJA, which is really should be the United Jihad Appeal, all of these AIPAC Jews and other traitors, and the AIPAC Jews are also traitors. What did they do? They worked day and night to undermine Ben Hecht and the right-wing Jabotinsky supporters that were trying to save the Jews during the Holocaust. So don't believe for a minute when they tell you about hostages and we have to free they don't care about hostages. They'll use any excuse to get Israel to commit suicide. And they control the media in Israel. And they control the media in the United States. These are Israeli billionaires who own the media in Israel. And all of them have business dealings with Arabs that want Israel destroyed, with European Nazis that want Israel destroyed, European Nazi countries that murdered 6 million Jews during the Holocaust and would like to see another one. These Israeli billionaires, to further their international business interests and their trade interests, they would sacrifice all 7 million Israeli Jews in a second. That's what we're dealing with here. And that's why we have to support the Hilltop Youth. They are, as Moshe Feiglin from the Zehut Party said, Moshe Feiglin was a member of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament, and he was the deputy speaker of the Knesset, and he's now running with the Zehut Party, and we support Moshe Feiglin, the Zehut Party. As he said, the Hilltop Youth are the hope of Israel. I did a video with him in Hebrew where he said, the hope of Israel are the Hilltop Youth. They're Israel's hope. And if you want that hope to succeed, and you want the Jews to survive and succeed and win against their evil Muslim Nazi enemies, you got to help the Hilltop Youth. And we've shown you how to do that. Help us. Do everything you can. And by the way, not just financial support. We need you to promote J.T.F. and spread the word about J.T.F. and get other people involved. All of that is very important. And yes, we also need to defeat Kamala Harris and elect Donald Trump. If we do what we're supposed to do, Hashem will help us. God will help us. He will save us if we do what we're supposed to do. The problem is not enough Jews are doing the right thing, are doing what they're supposed to do. Our problem is money. Our problem is money. We have the young idealistic Jewish heroes that are willing to put their lives on the line. We have what it takes to win. But we don't have the resources. We don't have enough resources to help them. Our problem is money. So when you help us financially, you're dealing with the number one challenge that we're facing. We need funds to help these people. And remember, 100% of our budget goes to the Hilltop Youth, to the heroic Hilltop Youth. And we're the only organization that is helping them, as you know. David?
Well, meanwhile, back in the USA, I think that was the name of a song, but that was past my era, so I'm not sure. Left-wing, far left-wing, Robert Reich, or is it Reich, who used to be, I believe, the Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury under Barack Obama, wants Elon Musk arrested for the things he's been saying. Elon Musk, I mean, he's famous, and everybody who's listening listens to him, but he's not saying anything that's out of moderation. It's just that the Democrat Party is no longer a Democrat Party. It is the Communist Party. And my wife, Ashadina, has been calling them communists for decades. She never uses the term liberal or progressive. She always calls them, she doesn't call them socialists. She calls them communists. And if you can't name your enemy, you can't defeat them.
By the way, Kamala Harris's father was an open communist. He openly called himself a Marxist and a communist. Her father from Jamaica, he was a Marxist professor, is speaking. There were articles about, I mean, he openly called himself a communist, just for the record. Okay, and everything they propose to do is communism. They say that Trump is a dictator, would be a dictator. Look who's talking. I mean, the danger of dictatorship comes from the left. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Kamala Harris also came out against free speech, and a judge from Minnesota came out and said, you don't have a right to free speech. This is a judge. Who appointed her or who voted her in? At lower level judges, they may be voted in, depending on state law. But where does she come off saying you don't have a right to free speech? And that boob, who's a Supreme Court justice now, who didn't know what the definition of a woman was when they interviewed her for that position, is also coming out against free speech. So, our people who listen to the show are not planning to vote for Kamala Harris. But you could see where this is going. The communists are getting bolder. They used to be called liberals, and they wanted to be called liberals. Then when the L word, liberal, became too much of a liability in elections, they switched to progressives. But they can't conceal the fact they're communists. They want total power, and the Democrats will do anything to get total power. Meanwhile, the Republicans are asleep at the switch. The Democrats are playing chess to win every election, while the Republicans are playing checkers. And the people, the masses, are asleep. While Labor Day has come and gone, and some more people, not a lot, but more, are finally watching what's going on in this election. Hopefully, as we are closer, more and more. But how many American boobs still don't know who they're going to vote for on the morning of Election Day? They make up their mind in the voting booth. People like that shouldn't be allowed to vote. If you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. And people like the founders never wanted dummies to vote.
But by the way, we're doing this show after, because it sounded almost like you were saying Election Day is coming up. We're doing this show after Labor Day, just so that people will know.
Yeah, it's 2 days after Labor Day. But the election's coming up, and it's believed a lot of people start paying attention after Labor Day. I don't think in this country people start paying attention. Some do, and there'll be more. But we're in the heart of football season, and that's more important than country to most Americans.
By the way, early voting begins on Friday in some states. Early voting has begun, or is beginning this week already. So let's understand now. 99% of the people who watch our videos are voting for Trump, support Trump. So what's the point then? We're just speaking to people who already support Trump. The point is we want to give you ammunition so you can convince other people. That's the point. You should know. You should be well armed with the facts. So you should know what's going on. That's the point. And of course, we supporting the Hilltop Youth, of course, that's the main thing that you should be doing. But even in terms of the political election, what we're talking about is important because people then go with the information they get here and hopefully spread this information to others.
And the Biden-Harris administration have brought us extreme inflation on steroids. But it's not just inflation that you see and feel out of your pocket, out of your wallet. It's also product shrinkage. I remember, maybe 8 years ago, there was, if you're an orange juice drinker, there was Minute Maid and Tropicana. Those were the big ones. And they came in 64-ounce containers, which is a half a gallon. And so there's a group of Florida orange growers. They put out a brand too. They cut their container from 64 to 59 ounces, and they called it the Easy Pour container. And of course, being thinner, it is easier to pour, but that's not why they did it. They're giving you less for the same price. How many products are so much smaller? You look at a bar of soap. When I was a kid, there were two types of soap. There was the hand soap. We didn't have these soft soaps and body washes and head wash and all these other washes. You had soap. It was a bar of soap. There was hand soap and a much bigger bath soap. And every brand put them out in two different sizes. Today, it's one size, and it costs so much more. And that one size is longer than the old hand soap, the smaller bar soap. But the old hand soap was about 1.25 inches thick. The bath soap was also 1.25 inches thick, and it was longer than today's bars of soap. If you still use something like Irish Spring or Ivory, these are tiny bars of soap at maybe 5 times the price. Now, here's an example. We saw what Harris and Biden did to prices. It was terrible inflation. I don't know how people were paying $5 a gallon for about a year. In California, we saw stations charging $7.35. And those same Californians are going to vote for the same people. Isn't the definition of idiocy doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting the results to come out different or better? Well, this will show how our government has been against us from the start. For the government, for the people, by the people, and against the people. That should have been the Gettysburg Address. When World War II was all over the world, we were still neutral. We came out with this submachine gun. It looked good on paper, but it was accurate, but it jammed and it rusted, especially if you put it in the Pacific. It became totally useless. So it was given to our Coast Guard patrolling our shores here. You couldn't use it in real combat. So these guns sold for $50 a piece from the manufacturer to the military. In today's money, actually not even today's money, this is 2022 money. It was $997. You all remember the Tommy gun with the round drum that the gangsters used to use. They tried it in the military. It jammed too much. So they had to go with a straight clip. And instead of 50 rounds, it held 30 rounds, but it rarely jammed. And the Tommy gun, some of the complaints, the soldiers loved it. Some of the complaints were by people who wanted to sell them something else. It was too heavy. That sold to the military, $250 per gun. Today, that would be $4,000. This is 1940 price. Today, that would be $4,400. That's how much inflation has eaten your fixed income, your savings, your Social Security. And if inflation goes up 8-10%, they're not going to give you an 8 or 10% raise because fuel and food, the two things you must buy, are not included in that equation. So if the price of a car goes up 2% and your television, the price of a new television goes up 1.5%, or you need a new refrigerator and that's 3% more than it was last year, that's how they calculate inflation. Inflation should be ignoring those items and based strictly on food and fuel. You must have food and fuel.
And by the way, I just rent, you know, my mother, a blessed memory, Malka Bat Meir, my beautiful mother, they were paying, the rent they were paying in their apartment in the 1940s was $18 a month rent. That was their rent, $18 a month in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The same apartment is still there. The same building is still there. You know, they renovated it. They redone it. The same apartment, though, is still there. And I just, out of curiosity, I wanted to see, because I wanted to see what, you know, how much it's renting for. It's now renting for $3,500 a month. It went from $18 to $3,500 a month. Okay, that's 200 times as expensive. And you know, all these yuppies that are renting apartments in the inner city, you know, in the cities, all these yuppies, most of them vote Democrat. Most of them are voting for Kamala Harris. That's what they're voting for. That's what they're voting for. Sick, very sick.
At table tennis yesterday, we had a guest from another club. He was actually one of the Diamonds who recorded Little Darlin' way back in the 50s. And he plays table tennis. And he's Jewish. He'll be voting for Kamala Harris. We're not allowed to talk politics at the club. And we play at the Elks Lodge. They don't want politics anywhere in the lodge. So I couldn't try and convince him, but he could see just from the few things I said that I know so much more than him. He said to me, you know so much more than I do. But I couldn't talk about it. He asked me if I would be supporting Trump. I said, I'm voting for him. I don't support him. I wanted somebody far to the right of Donald Trump. And that was it. I dropped it there. But he's Jewish. He's in his late 80s now. And he'll be voting for Kamala Harris. I could have gone on. Why? Do you like paying $3.50 for a gallon of gas? Was $2 a gallon bothering you? Do you like paying $4.50 for a dozen eggs? Was $1.75 too much for you? Actually, when it was on sale, at least in my town, a lot of times when it was on sale, you could buy a dozen eggs for less than $1. I told this once before, there was one sale week. I don't know how or why they did this, but they sold a dozen eggs for 3 cents. That's not even 1950s prices, 3 cents. And then they came back a month later and sold a dozen eggs for 24 cents. Maybe they were overstocked with them and they had to get rid of them. But you were allowed to, it was a limit of 2. So, of course, I bought 2 dozen eggs for 6 cents.
You remember the newspapers were a penny?
No, I don't remember a penny. I remember a nickel.
Okay.
And a telephone call was a nickel.
Right. But there was a time when the newspapers were 1 cent. And then if you're talking about the 1950s, the 50s, they were a nickel, yeah. And of course, the subway ride was a nickel. And a telephone call was a nickel. And now the same newspapers are $2.50, $3 each. And the same garbage, though, that you had for a penny. They're not worth a penny. They're worth nothing. They should all drop dead. But anyway, go ahead.
And greeting cards, 25 cents for the cheaper ones, 35 cents for the fancy ones. Today they're $4, $5, $6, and $7. The subway ride was 5 cents. Taking the Staten Island ferry from Manhattan to Staten Island was a nickel.
Now,
try doing that now.
It's $2.75 now. $2.70.
And in the 50s, crossing the Whitestone Bridge was 25 cents. What was it? A paycheck now?
It's a lot of money. I don't even know what it is.
It was $8 when we left.
No, it
so
goes up.
Now it must be 9 or 10.
Who knows?
Why would anyone want to live there? Why would anyone who just went through this past 4 years want to continue it for 4 years more?
Did you see now I know that you saw the video we did on San Francisco, right? We did a
Yes.
video showing Kamala Harris's San Francisco. And we did get one left-wing person commenting on it saying, Kamala Harris hasn't been district attorney there for so many years, and Donald Trump, why don't you blame him for this? The downfall of San Francisco and California started with the left-wing politicians like Kamala Harris letting all the murderers out. What we showed in the streets of San Francisco, you should see our video, by the way, those of you who haven't seen it on San Francisco. What we showed on that video in San Francisco, that was under Kamala Harris as DA that started. Those people that are out on the street, all those drug dealers and all those other gang leaders and other people that have destroyed San Francisco, that was started under Kamala Harris. And the same, and by the way, we may show other cities in California too. I don't know if we'll do that, but we may show video of her because she was the Attorney General of California. She did the same thing on a statewide basis. They destroyed San Francisco and California. And we know that Donald Trump's policies are not the same as hers. Because you see, the rest of the whole country didn't turn into what happened in San Francisco when Donald Trump was president. But the whole country is turning into San Francisco under Kamala Harris. With the release of all these illegal aliens, the whole country is going to start to look like San Francisco eventually. I'm sorry, go ahead.
One thing I noticed in that video was not just the homeless bums on the street and the drug addicts and the garbage. What I noticed was, where are the cars? If you watch that, very few cars go back and forth. The traffic is light. So who's living there? Just homeless people? The stores are empty no matter where you go. And the biggest mall in San Francisco, called Barcadero, I guess that's how you pronounce it, every store in the mall is closed. I don't even know if the mall is open anymore. What's the point if every store is closed? And the thing is, the government you voted for did this to you. They destroyed one of the greatest cities in the world, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Today, it's a dump. Oakland in California is a bigger dump than San Francisco. It literally is a garbage dump. And Los Angeles, maybe you'll do one on Los Angeles. I've seen people driving down the streets, videoing it, and it's just endless streets of homeless people lining the streets, tents and boxes, mostly tents though. And Los Angeles, if you remember, the Brooklyn Dodgers moved to Los Angeles because they wanted to get away from the slums of Brooklyn. And Los Angeles was beautiful, a wide open city. And today, homeless lining the streets. If there are so many people leaving these cities, where does the tax revenue come from? And that's something that just feeds the government, that tax revenue, because then they just take it and give it away. Meanwhile, in Colorado, gangs from Venezuela and Nicaragua are taking over apartment complexes. And
with machine guns. With machine guns.
Yes, I saw pictures of that. And also pistols, semi-automatics. And I saw videos. I don't know if this is true or not. There's so much generated by artificial intelligence. You have to verify and re-verify and re-verify. You better at least check it 3 times before you report it. But I saw 2 videos that said Hell's Angels is on its way to Colorado to clean out the apartment building. But those people in the apartment building have machine guns. Now, the Hell's Angels may be tough guys, maybe with knives, maybe with chains. That's not going to stand up against a machine gun. So if it is true they're going there, they better go well armed. And for you people
they're not going to go. First of all, you know the police, whose side the police will be on.
Sure.
They're not going to. It's all baloney.
Well, they were so successful taking over the apartment complex in Colorado. They're doing it in Chicago now too, and New York. Notice I put the R in York. I didn't say York. For those of you who support, wait, let me go back up. Meanwhile, in the state of Oklahoma, which election after election after election didn't have a single blue district. Every district was red. I don't know if that's still true today, but usually Oklahoma was the state where every district was red. They're confiscating American flags in high school. If you have a truck and you go to high school, a pickup truck, and you fly those 2 American flags in the back, like you see so many times, or sometimes they fly POW, missing in action flags, but it's usually American flags. The school is confiscating it.
Because the teachers union are communists, literally communists.
Yes, they are.
Randy Weingarten is a communist. You remember Albert Shanker?
Sure.
Remember? Okay.
He was head of the teachers union when I was in school.
Right. He was the head of the American Federation of Teachers, which is the biggest teachers union in the country. And then there's the National Education Association, both of them controlled literally by communists. By the way, Albert Shanker called himself a socialist. He called himself a socialist, but he was a communist. And the teachers are communists. This is what's teaching your children. And that Tampon Tim Waltz, that hideous animal, he's so proud to be a teacher and be involved with the teachers union. And he says, I'm not a defender of the union. I am the union, he says. And all the commies in the union cheering. I mean, the teachers union are controlled literally by communists. And Tampon Tim was part of that. Just so that people will understand what we're talking about. This is why they teach in the schools. They're teaching your children to change their sex and to be transgenders and to hate America and to hate Israel and to support everything that's evil. This is what your children are going to be being brainwashed to believe in the school system that Tampon Tim says he's so proud of.
And that's all they're teaching. It's indoctrination and computers. The subjects we learned in school, history, which we used to call social studies, and English, which nobody can write correctly anymore. And if you use a word that has maybe 7 letters in it, nobody knows the meaning of that word. Math, science, that's not being taught anymore. They want penmanship. I'm left-handed. We push the pen instead of pulling it like a righty does. And lefties usually don't have good penmanship. My penmanship is so bad. I remember a high school teacher told me, remind me to never call you to the board again. Your writing looks like chicken scratches. Nobody in the class can read what you wrote. That's why lefties don't have very good penmanship, usually. There's always exceptions, but because you're pushing the pen instead of pulling it like a righty would. And in Michigan, Cornel West, I believe, dropped out of the election. And the Michigan Secretary of State, so it wouldn't be any competition to Kamala Harris, removed his name from the ballot. But when Robert Kennedy Jr. dropped out, the Michigan Secretary of State wanted him to take votes from Donald Trump, so she refused to remove his name. So a judge ordered that they put Cornel West's name back on the ballot.
By the way, she's the same Secretary of State, another communist. She's the same Secretary of State that tried to take Donald Trump's name off the ballot. You remember that?
Yes.
She said Trump he can't be on the ballot. He's an insurrectionist. Oh, Kamala Harris and the communists are not insurrectionists. Communism is not insurrection against the United States Constitution and the government. That's not insurrection. No, Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. I'm telling you, for those of you out there, and I'm speaking to the Gentiles now because Jews belong in Israel. Jews do not belong in the United States. You belong in Israel. But for the Gentiles who are watching this show, who care about the future of the United States of America, let me tell you something. If she wins, I don't see, how do you get out from under this if she wins? I don't know. I don't know what America is going to be able to do if she wins. I don't know. The left is so fascistic and so committed to destroying any vestige of freedom or liberty or truth, I don't know how you get out from under that.
Or any vestige of America.
Yeah, they hate America. They want the new America. They say diversity is our strength. There's no diversity. They don't believe in diversity. They believe in uniform compliance with the communist ideology. If you dare, diversity means you allow for different opinions and different views. They don't allow for any different opinion. They censor and attack and malign anybody and go after anybody that dares to say anything different.
And for those of you who are supporting Hamas and saying Israel's going too far, yeah, Netanyahu's going too far, right? And support Hezbollah, the Muslims aren't just attacking Israel. Since October 7th, when I was showed this by Yeshadina on Sunday afternoon, it was a French church burning down to the ground. It was a church that survived 2 world wars, and it's burning down to the ground because a fire was set by Muslims. And then she showed me the next picture, a map of France with all the churches that burnt down to the ground, little red circles over them within the map of France. And there was well over 50 red circles, maybe as many as 75 churches that have burnt down to the ground. They started burning a few and knifing people in Germany. They started burning a church in Russia. I don't know if Russia's going to tolerate that. They burnt a church down in Ireland, and in England, they're breaking the crosses off of churches. And this woman dressed in the full Muslim garb said to a Catholic man, I believe this was in England, and Catholics are not that common in England because it's the Anglican church there. But there are Catholics, but just not that many. And she said to him, we are going to destroy your religion. So it's not just they're anti-Jewish, they're anti-Christian. How many times have you heard in Islam, do not take Jews or Christians as your friends, for they are but friends with each other.
By the way, all of North Africa, from Morocco to Egypt, all of North Africa was Christian once. Was Christian. North Africa were Christians. They had bishops, they had churches. Now it's all Muslim.
By conquest.
How did that happen? It happened with the sword. With the sword. People who did not convert were slaughtered. They forcibly converted them. They raped all the women. They converted them by force. And now all of North Africa is Muslim. I mean, that's how Islam spread. That's how Muhammad spread Islam. But just for the record, just so that people will know what we're dealing with. You know what we're dealing with here, and little Israel is the problem. Little Israel is the problem because they don't. You know, I wish Israel did 1% of what everybody accuses them of. I wish they did do all of the things that everybody accuses them of. But anyway.
Yeah, in chat rooms, people tell me Israel did this and Israel did that. And I tell them, if I were in charge, Israel would have really done that and more.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, back in the USA again, and this is a warning, and spread this warning, illegals are posing as utility workers to get into your house. So don't open the door. If you didn't send for somebody and some repairman comes, maybe to fix your phone or your electricity or something, or to install a meter, don't open the door because they're most likely going to be illegal aliens who are there to rob you. Hopefully no more than that. And then 2 young men, in the looser sense, about 20 years old, beat up a young girl, 17 years old, because she was wearing a Trump shirt. She was bleeding from her knee. The blood was running down to her ankles. They were still punching her in the face. Her face was all swollen. She was all covered up. And she was, and they kept yelling, Trump's a racist, you're a racist. I would, if these were civilized people, I would love to sit down with them and ask them, explain to me where Trump is a racist. When he was president, more non-white people were working than ever before, not just blacks, not just Hispanics. He made sure that they were employed. All you got to do is raise a rising tide lifts all boats. So more blacks and Hispanics were working than ever before. And they accused Trump of being a racist. It's the Democrat Party, the Communist Party, that measures everything by race. They count by race. They count by your gender. They count by your sexual orientation. Qualifications aren't necessary. You just have to be the right gender or the right race, and you'll get the top spot.
By the way, a lot of violence against people with MAGA hats or a lot of violence against them from the tolerant people of the left who claim to be against dictatorship. I mean, a lot of violence. And, Latinos should know from Cuba and Venezuela what happens when the communists take over. They should know. They should ask the Cubans and the Venezuelans what happens when you have when you have communist leaders in charge. In Argentina, they have a guy now who, by the way, was considering converting to Judaism. He loves Israel and very the new president of Argentina, very pro-Jewish, and was actually saying that he's considering converting to Judaism. Anyway, he is eliminating bureaucracy, cutting taxes, and everybody said it's going to be a disaster. All the experts came on TV. All the economists and the experts and the Wall Street analysts, this is going to be a disaster when he does this. It's going to lead to a depression. Argentina's economy now is booming for the first time. And they had 1,000% inflation every year. 1,000%. Runaway inflation. The inflation rate is coming way down. All he did is he's cutting government, eliminating government bureaucrats, cutting taxes, getting government out of the way. And amazingly, certain things are happening. Look at the difference between Argentina and Venezuela, where people are starving. A country that has billions and billions of barrels of oil to export, and the country is starving. I mean, it's unbelievable. Or Cuba. I mean, look what happens when they take over. Latinos should know that. Latinos, they should ask the Cubans and the Venezuelans what happens, and the Argentinians what happens. Kamala Harris, she's going to do to America what happens in every socialist country. You're going to have the same results, guaranteed.
Coming out of World War I, England was still the richest country in the world because of their empire. We were second, tied with Argentina. Now, we chose industrialization and quite a bit of freedom that we don't have now, while Argentina chose socialism. And Argentina was a poor country for most of the century, for the whole rest of the 20th century. It's only now they're reversing it, because they're getting away from socialism while we're collapsing into it. And one last thing. There was a video of a Muslim woman dressed in street clothes, no head covering, doing a dance. She must be very Americanized because she was shaking her body quite a bit. But the big thing was no head covering. So the next day, her brother beat her to a pulp. Her face is swollen like a small pumpkin. And of course, nothing's going to happen to him because it's part of their culture. Well, that's the culture the people in Washington are bringing into this country. Third world culture, and they're turning us, we're already there. We're a third world country. Just look at our infrastructure, our crime, our schools, our debt. If we're not a third world country, who is? Chaim?
Well, in Iran, those protests started because a woman was wearing her hijab, and she was wearing the hijab, but she wasn't covering enough of her hair. And so the Iranian police beat her to death. The Iranian Muslim police beat her to death. And that set off protests in Iran. But that's who Israel is up against, people with that mentality. And that's who these people on the college campuses that are protesting, that Kamala Harris supports, by the way, that's who these people are backing. It's really unbelievable. In your heart, you know we're right. And in your guts, you know they're nuts. Help us, join with us. If we fight together as a team, we can change history and make this a better world. For J.T.F., until next week, this is Chaim Ben Pesach. Shalom.